In this recording, we're going to, these are instructions on how to calculate total cost with fixed and variable costs. We're also going to talk about the cost per patient or per procedure in these instructions. So we want to go back and classify costs again, just to review. Fixed costs, things like overhead, cost of equipment, they're not influenced by a change in volume. No matter how many patients or procedures you're doing, these fixed costs do not change. Variable costs do rise and fall with volume, and they're costs like the supply costs. If we're doing x-rays, it would be the cost of film and those kinds of things. And there's a certain cost per procedure, per patient. And the semi-variable costs, they're partially fixed and partially variable, and depending on how they are affected by volume, we need to use that information to determine how much total costs would be. We're going to look at various ways that semi-variable costs are affected by volume. Let's look at the relationships. Fixed costs, again, we said do not change with volume. So the cost per unit of volume, as it decreases, it decreases as volume increases. The cost per unit of volume decreases as the volume increases. So we only have one patient, and we have total fixed costs of $100,000. We have a cost per patient of fixed costs of $100,000. Again, it isn't affected by volume, so if we have one patient, it's still going to cost us $100,000. If we had 100 patients, it still costs us $100,000, but the cost per patient goes down to $1,000. We divide the $100,000 by 100 patients, it's $1,000 for each patient. Our fixed costs go down to only $100 per patient if we have 1,000 patients. Again, 100,000 divided by 1,000, $100 per patient in fixed costs. Our variable costs increases with volume, but the cost per unit of volume stays the same. So let's say we have a cost per patient of $10. We have one patient, we have $10. If we have 100 patients, it's going to cost us $1,000 to provide those 100 patients with care, given, again, the cost per patient at $10. 1,000 patients, it's going to cost us $10,000. So you see the relationship there. The variable cost increases with volume, but the cost per unit of volume stays the same. Okay. Let's look at how we then would calculate costs using just fixed and variable costs. How much will it cost a provider if fixed costs are $100,000, and variable costs are $10 per patient, and we have 700 patients? Well, we list our fixed costs, $100,000. We then multiply our variable cost, $10, by our volume, 700 patients, and we come up with $7,000 in variable costs. We add those two together, and we see that our costs for supplying services to these 700 patients is $107,000. Well, how much is it going to cost us per patient? It's going to cost us $107,000 divided by our 700 patients, $152 and about 86 cents, rounding to the nearest penny. So that's how much we'd need to charge in order just to break even, $152.86. Well, let's say that our volume increases to 800 patients. Then what would our total cost be? Well, again, we just list our fixed costs of $100,000. We calculate our variable costs by taking the $10 per patient times our 800 patients, and we come up with $8,000. We add those two together, and we see that the total cost is $108,000. Well, how much does it cost per patient? We take our 108,000 divided by 800, and we see that now our cost per patient is $135. It has gone down from the $152.86 down to $135. Now we'd have to charge $135 to break even. Okay, so I'd like you to look at this, kind of come to understand it. There will be a question on the exam for this module that looks very similar to this. That I just want to make sure that you understand how to calculate costs, total costs, and cost per procedure per patient, given this kind of information. We're going to switch over now to semi-variable cost calculations, and these are a little bit more complicated due to the fact that they're affected by volume in various ways. Semi-variable costs are affected by volume, but not on a one-to-one basis like variable costs do. And they don't just stay the same like fixed costs. Some semi-variable costs are affected by volume in a way that we can just simply calculate and add. When I was the administrator at Covenant Village, we had painting costs. And some of those costs were fixed as far as routine maintenance, but some of them were affected by volume of new residents because we painted the new apartment, or painted the apartment when a new resident moved in. So our regular routine painting, we could calculate that based on historical costs. We knew about how much that routine maintenance kind of painting would cost us. We also knew how much one apartment cost to repaint when a new resident moved in. So what we did is we took our routine costs of painting, and then we took our cost per apartment and multiplied that times the number of new residents we estimated we would be getting moving in over the next year. We added those together to come up with our semi-variable costs of painting for the year, for the budget. Other semi-variable costs are affected by volume in a way that can be calculated as a percentage. For each additional resident in a skilled nursing facility, we knew that our meal costs consisted of some fixed costs like cook wages and equipment and those kinds of things, and some variable costs like raw food. We then could calculate what percent were fixed costs and what percent were variable costs, and we decided or calculated that 75% of the cost of a plate or a meal was 75%. Those were our variable costs. So we then would take that figure and calculate that if we had one more person move in and our costs per meal were $8 a day, it would cost us $6 for that one additional resident. You could say that $2 were fixed costs and $6 were variable. Just another way of thinking about this. But it was much easier to calculate when we looked at these semi-variable costs in terms of percentage. So 75% were variable. We took our cost per day of $8. We multiplied that times 75%, and we said, okay, one more resident is going to cost us $6 per day. So just another way of figuring and calculating semi-variable costs. Semi-variable costs also can be affected by volume in a stepwise fashion. In a nursing home that I was administrator at, we had 15 nursing assistants that took care of the one shift, the day shift, those residents. But when we had more than 94 residents, we bump up to 95 residents. It was very difficult for those folks to do a good job caring for that many residents. So we bumped up the number of CNAs, or certified nursing assistants. And typically it was difficult to hire someone for only 2 hours a day or 4 hours a day, and we really needed them for the whole shift. So we really needed to add a whole new FTE to cover those additional residents. And we could get by with 16 up until we reached a point of about 101 residents, and we had to add another CNA. And at 107 residents, we added another CNA. So you can see that it goes up in a stepwise manner. Now, if we look at that in on the table here, we can see that at 93 residents, we had 15 CNAs. The cost per day, considering 8-hour shift and $12 an hour, times the 15 CNAs, it was $1,440 for the CNAs for that shift. And the cost per patient per day was $15.48. And of course, if we added another resident, that cost came down because we were dividing the number of CNAs between 94 instead of 93 patients. But when we get to that point where we reach that threshold and we need another CNA, the cost per patient jumps up to $16.17 per patient day. Now, because we've added one more CNA, so the total cost is $1,536. The problem that we faced was that our reimbursement would not fully cover that one more resident when we had to bump up the number of staff. We didn't, let's just say that our cost, our reimbursement was $1.84. Or $15.84. We really needed then to get a few more residents coming in, so we're up to 97 residents to reach that $15.84 threshold. And then we were actually able to more than break even if we had 98 residents or 99. Even 100. We were down to $15.36 in costs, and but our reimbursement was at $15.84, so we were making a few cents there. However, again, we jump up to 101 residents, we add another CNA, and we're up to $16.16 per patient per day, or per resident per day. And then again, we're losing money. Because the cost per patient per day is greater than what our reimbursement is, and it takes us up until we get up to 103 residents again to break even at $15.84. So there are times when if it's in a stepwise fashion like this, we need to manage our census carefully so that we don't put the organization in jeopardy by adding that one more resident if they're at that threshold of having to jump up and bump up the number of staff needed to care for them, or some other costs that might be affected in this similar way in a stepwise fashion. So that's it. Just wanted to go over those with you, and if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. Thanks.